This is Module 9. We're doing Example 7. It asks to use the given table to identify the interval of plausible values for the population parameter pi using a significance level of alpha. So notice it is asking us to find a 95% confidence interval. I know that because we're given that the significance level alpha is 0.05. If you have a significance level of 5%, it means your confidence level is 95%. So to find an interval of plausible values, to find the confidence interval, we need to look at the hypothesized value of pi, identify its p-value. If the p-value is bigger than 0.05, then that hypothesized value of pi is plausible. If the p-value is smaller than 0.05, then we would reject that pi as being a plausible value. And remember, if the hypothesized value of pi is plausible, that means it's in the confidence interval, because that's what a confidence interval is. A confidence interval is an interval of plausible values. So let's look at the first row. What they're saying in this first row is that we're hypothesizing in our null hypothesis that pi is equal to 0.45. They're saying the proportion is 0.45 in the null hypothesis. They're hypothesizing that pi is 0.45. If that is your null hypothesis, then you'll get a p-value of 0.007. Notice that is smaller than 0.05. It's smaller than the significance level. So, since the p-value is smaller than 0.05, we would reject this value of pi as being plausible. A new null hypothesis. The new null hypothesis is that pi is equal to 0.46. If that's our null hypothesis, then we'll get a p-value of 0.012. Again, we compare it to the significance level, which is 0.05, and 0.012 is smaller than 0.05. So again, we reject this null hypothesis. That is not a plausible value of pi. And I repeat, if I do pi equals 0.47, that has a p-value of 0.045, which is smaller than 0.05. So we reject. And then we repeat again. If pi is equal to 0.48 in our null hypothesis, this time we get a p-value that is bigger than 0.05. So this time I have hypothesized a value of pi, and we get a p-value that's big, which makes that null hypothesis plausible, which means pi equals 0.48 is a value in the confidence interval. Then we repeat. If you hypothesize 0.49, the p-value is 0.121. Again, greater than 0.05. In fact, all of these p-values for a long stretch are all bigger than 0.05. That means these hypothesized values of pi are all plausible, all the way down to where p-value is 0.052, which is bigger than 0.05. That happened when we did a null hypothesis of pi equals 0.56, but that's the last one in the table that's plausible. Notice when you get up to a pi equaling 0.57, again, we start to see the p-value is smaller than 0.05. So that would be a rejected value of pi. So would 0.58 and 0.59 and 0.6. So looks like for this table, the values of pi that are plausible, the values of pi that are in the confidence interval, the values of pi that produce a p-value bigger than 0.05 are the values spanning from 0.48 up to 0.56. So that is our confidence interval. I've written it there in interval notation. Let's go ahead and also write it using our margin of error notation. Notice we're saying that our interval of plausible values for pi spans from 0.48 up to 0.56. If we want to write it with our margin of error notation, I have to find the value right in the center of that. So if you add those together and divide by 2, you get 0.52, which must be the value of our statistic, because remember the statistic is always right in the middle of the confidence interval. And if you want the margin of error, we need to find this distance from the statistic to the upper end of the confidence interval, or the distance from the statistic down to the lower end of the confidence interval. Either way you do it, you find that this distance is 0.04. So the other way to write our confidence interval is to say that we think pi is 0.52 plus or minus 0.04. Finally, then, I'm going to write a sentence to also include that 95% confidence level in what we are concluding here. We are 95% confident that the true value of pi is between 0.48 and 0.56. It would also be okay for you to say we're 95% confident that the true value of pi is between 48% and 56%.